I will be giving you some introductory stuff. That's going to go on the front side of your sheet there. And then we're going to get into the first chapter as far as we can for the second part. Well, we've got plenty of time, so we'll probably be able to do it. Let's go ahead, however, and start with a word of prayer. Father, how wonderful it is that you allow us to come into your presence, Father, and to worship you as your people. And Father, to know that one day our voices will be blending with the voices of those countless millions who've gone before us. And Father, that we might praise you throughout all eternity, truly, Father, is going to be our privilege to accomplish that. For as Donnie was mentioning during his prayer about all the wonderful things that you have done. And Father, we know in our own lives there's been many times when things have turned out in such a way that only you could have been possible behind it. And Father, there are other things that we won't know until we get to glory that you have kept from happening in our lives. Too often, Father, we look at the things that we don't like and we know that we blame you, and when things that are going right, we think that we're responsible for it. And Father, forgive us for our foolishness and forgive us for our pride, because sometimes, Father, that's a battle we all lose. Father, be with us now as we continue our class time, and we start our new series on the book of Esther. Father, help us to recognize there are some pretty powerful truths that are found within this book, and help us, Father, to learn those lessons that we might apply them also to our own lives. Thank you, Father, for your Son. For more than anything, we're grateful for him, and we offer this prayer in our lives to you in his name. Okay, Esther. If Esther is not the strangest book in the Bible, then it's probably in the top 2 or 3. When commentators ask the question, well, what kind of book is the book of Esther? They answer it a lot of different ways. They say, well, is it a fiction book? It seems like it's got a lot of fiction to it. Or is it maybe it's a historical fiction? Why, maybe it's a commentary or a comedy. Or is it a Persian chronicle? Is it a Greek romance? Is it a carnival tale? Is it wisdom? Is it burlesque? Each of these answers has been proposed by various commentaries that you can read. Now, about all the commentaries can agree on is that Esther is a rather strange book. And let me give you some reasons why, and you can put these in your notes there on the front page. Although the heathen king of Persia, his name is Xerxes, is mentioned 190 times in 167 verses. Now, 29 of those times he's mentioned by name. The other times it's he or him or some pronoun where they're talking about the king. But 190 times the king is mentioned. How many times is God mentioned in this book? 0. God is never mentioned in the book of Esther. There's not even a divine title or pronoun referring to God in this book. God is likewise not named in the Song of Solomon either, but I just want you to know, I think that's a rather amazing thing. So, they mention the king, but they don't mention him who is king. Is there anybody who did not pick up one of those handouts that was on that table back there? If not, raise your hand, because I have a lovely assistant who would be Cheryl right there, who would be willing to hand that to you. Is there anybody else who did not receive one? I know I tried to overlook several people, but they caught me on it. You mean it's those other people that I overlooked? Yeah, Xerxes or Ahasuerus. But we'll talk about that when we get to that. So what are some things that are not mentioned? Well, God's commands or his relationship with his people are not mentioned. This is kind of an odd situation. There's no mention of Satan or angels either. There's no mention of the covenant that God had with either Abraham or that he has through Moses. And unlike the book of Daniel, no one prays in the book of Esther. No one has a vision in the book of Esther. There are no miracles in the book of Esther. And so you kind of wonder, is this even a book that should be in the Bible? It doesn't mention God. It doesn't mention his covenant. It doesn't mention all these other spiritual issues. Those are some things that are not mentioned. Other than the fact that the book is about the Jewish people, there's nothing Jewish about it in a religious sense. There's no apparent concern for the law of God in the book of Esther. However, Haman and we'll find out he's the antagonist in the book. But Haman in chapter 3 and verse 8, he says, their laws are diverse from all people. So that's about as close as they get to coming to talking about the laws of the Jews. And although the book was written after the events of Ezra, chapters 1 through 6, there's no mention of Jerusalem or the temple in this book. Now we're talking about an Old Testament book. And so notice the things that are not mentioned, things that you would think, the covenant, God, the temple, Jerusalem. Nope, none of those are mentioned. In fact, it says, if one went through the text and replaced every occurrence of the word Jews with the name of some other ethnic group, there'd be no reason to think that the story had anything at all to do with the Bible. The lack of religious language in the book is highly unusual for the books at that time, and apparently it's intentional that religious language is not used. But as one commentator noted, God seems to lurk everywhere in the background of this book. I thought that was an odd way of saying that, but that's what they said. So, where we don't find Esther. Esther is the only book in the Old Testament that was not found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. Certainly it was written before the Qumran community even existed, and I'm sure they had that information. But the omission was probably caused because the Essenes did not celebrate the Feast of Purim, or Purim, if you like to call it that. So they did not celebrate that particular feast, number one. Number two, the book of Esther is never cited or even alluded to in the New Testament. Are you kind of getting the idea that, is Esther really supposed to be a part of the Old Testament? It really is, but it's kind of funny, all this stuff. Neither do we read about Esther or Mordecai ever being mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. Now, as we discussed, Mordecai is found in Ezra chapter 2 and verse 2 is almost certainly not the same Mordecai that we meet in the book of Esther. Mordecai is probably just a more common name. And some other unique things about this book before we get into it. Esther is only one of two books in the Bible that's named for a woman. And the other one is named Ruth. And ladies, pretty soon you're going to be having a class on the book of Ruth at this time. Now that's pretty cool, because I happen to know the teacher. And they never let me sit in her class. The longest verse in the Bible is found in the book of Esther. Esther chapter 8 and verse 9. It has 78 words in it. So if you're ever on Jeopardy, I mean, those kind of facts is like, I don't know why we do this with our children. You know, we train our children to, until they get to about third grade, we're training our children to become little Jews. Because all the stories that we teach them are about Noah, about Daniel, about Moses, about Cain and Abel, and we do all those sorts of things. And I love it when we impress the adults by having the children come up and recite the 39 books in the Old Testament. And then we go home and say, now teach your parents. Verse in the Bible is found in Esther chapter 8 and in verse 9, where there are 78 words. Okay, and something, where is Kathy? Did the Henleys had to go out because Steve wanted his Father's Day lunch? He was kind of hungry. That's what I think really happened. You know, this morning when we had this, as you notice, there was this huge gap. I mean, I felt like I was in Hades. Sadly for you, I was in paradise. But there was this large chasm between us, fixed. Anyhow, surprisingly, one of the central themes about Esther is the idea of feasting. The Hebrew word feast or banquet occurs nearly as many times in Esther as it does in the rest of the Old Testament books put together. She's a woman? Is that it? You guys, you make this class so much fun. Okay, so let's go ahead now and get into the book of Esther. As I think I have Do I have an introduction on the back side of your sheet? I thought I put it there. Okay, just for the sake of the millions of people who are watching us around the world. Why is our guy in the back who knows how many people watch this thing laughing at me? Okay, let me read this for their benefit. The story of Esther takes place after Ezra and the Jews had returned to Canaan from Babylonian captivity. So after Cyrus, who happened to be king there in Persia, he had a dream where God said, let my people go, essentially, and he did. And so Ezra, the scribe, writes about Cyrus doing this, and if you read, I think it's over in chapter 2, you have a roster of all the names of all these people who did come back. So this takes place, the book of Esther takes place after many of the people, of the Jews who had been in Persia, had left. They had returned to Jerusalem. The Medes and the Persians are currently the dominant world power. Haggai and Zechariah have prophesied to rebuild the temple, and it has been completed. So the temple also has been completed. Nehemiah has not yet returned to rebuild the walls, however, so we're kind of between Haggai and Nehemiah. And Esther and the other Jews had remained behind instead of returning to their ancestors or the land of their ancestors. And so this is their story. This is that particular story. So, having done all that, I've given everybody now an opportunity to find the book of Esther. I haven't yet. But I'm going to go ahead and read the first chapter. And then you see there's going to be some questions that I'm going to ask you, like what are some of Xerxes' problems and Vashti and all that sort of stuff. But let's go ahead and begin. Esther chapter 1, verse 1 begins, Now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. My wife is currently watching a series online regarding Persia. Well, this is that particular time, Chrissy. And notice they had 127. Last night they were talking about how were they able to maintain rule over such a far-flung empire. 127 provinces. In those days, as King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was in Susa, the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet. So here we are with the feasting thing. A banquet for all his princes and attendants, the army officers of Persia and Media, the nobles, and the princes of the provinces being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days. 180 days. A feast that lasts 180 days. And so far, it sounds like the only entertainment is, let me show you what I have. So that's what he's doing. And when these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Susa, the capital. Somehow that just doesn't seem fair. 180 days for all the nobility, all the gentry, all the the big dogs. 7 days for everybody else. Wonder if they got leftovers. So 7 days for that in the capital, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. And there were hangings of fine white and violet linen, held by cords, and the fine purple linen on silver rings, and the marble columns, and the couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful according to the king's bounty. And the drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion. You don't have to drink. For so the king had given orders to each official of his household that he should do according to the desires of each person. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So now we have two things going on here. Vashti, and she's got her banquet, and we have Ahasuerus and his banquet. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine. What's a synonym for merry with wine? He was drunk. So he was merry with wine. He commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. Then the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. So he's merry with wine, and then he becomes very angry. Some of you probably have seen that sort of thing in others. So the king then said to the wise men who understood the times, for it was the custom of the king so to speak before all who knew law and justice, and were close to him, Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, Memucan, and the 7 princes of Persia and Media who had access to the king's presence and sat in the first place in the kingdom, according to law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus, delivered by the eunuchs. And in the presence of the king and the princes, Memucan said, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also all the princes and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. You get yourself a strong woman, and it's a problem. And notice what happens here. She is going to be the problem in all the provinces. It's not just a problem in the king's house now. All the provinces and all the problems in all the provinces, and that grassy knoll outside of Dallas, she was there. I mean, it's just, I'm sorry, I'm making light of this, but this is kind of just crazy. Okay, what is to be done with her? So she's wronged all the people in all the provinces, King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women. Now that I'm just going to stop myself from saying what I really want to say right there. Has become to known all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands by saying, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought to his presence, but she didn't come. And in this day, the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard the queen's conduct will speak in the same way to all the king's princes, and there will be plenty of contempt and anger. If it pleases the king, let a royal edict be issued by him, and let it be written in the laws of the Medes of the Persians, so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti should come no more into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. We know what worthy means, right? And when the king's edict, which he shall make, is heard throughout all his kingdoms, great as it is, then all the women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. And this word pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. So he let letters be written, or sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province according to its script, and to every people according to their language, that every man should be the master in his own house, and the one who speaks in the language of his own people. So there. Having heard that, let's answer the first question. What are Xerxes? Xerxes is probably, you probably know that name, or that name might be more familiar to you than Ahasuerus. What are his, notice I use the word problem here, pluralized. And if you're going to answer, do this sort of thing so that my same lovely assistant who handed out the papers will also hand you the lollipop, and so you can speak into that so that all the world may hear you. Raise your hand. Okay. Now, see, you're going to keep your job because that other guy who used to be here. And where's he today? Okay.
Mine's more historical. Why was he named Xerxes and this name too?
Okay, because one is written, I believe Ahasuerus is the Greek and Xerxes is more the Persian. That's it?
That's it. Other than I like his commandment.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, on Father's Day you say that. yeah. Today grace abounds. Okay, what else? What do you see here as Xerxes, or do you not see any problem at all? If you don't see a problem with what Xerxes has done, raise your hand. Don't hand the lollipop. Okay, we definitely want to hear that one again. He was what? He was a spoiled drunk. Okay. Drunkenness. Yeah, we read that kind of in verses 7 and 10. Now, why is drunkenness since I use the word problem, why is drunkenness a problem? Yes, well, go ahead. Now, see, we'll hand you the lollipop again. You can share that with the class. Yes, sir, Larry.
Because if you're intoxicated, like they're saying in here in the scripture, then he is not thinking logically on anything. He's just rushing to judgment and expects everybody to obey what he says, even though it may not be the correct thing for him to do with it being a ruler.
Okay.
And so there's the problem.
All right. Yes, drunkenness affects the way that we think. A lot of times you'll hear people say, well, drunkenness, alcohol is a stimulant, because people say, I just feel so much more, alive, and I'm so much funnier, and I'm so much this, and when I have had a few drinks. And alcohol is not a stimulant. What is it? It's a depressant. Exactly right. And what is the very first thing that it depresses? Your inhibitions. It depresses your inhibitions. You think you're funny because you're up there doing things that you never would do otherwise, so you think you're funny. It's why some guys try to ply women with alcohol. Why? Because it inhibits her inhibitions. It depresses her inhibitions, and so they think that's a good thing for it. Why else is drunkenness a problem? Go ahead and think New Testament now. Because it's a sin. It is a sin. It separates us from God. And, even in the Solomon's day, he said, do not look at the wine when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly, and so on and so forth. Why? Because in the end, it bites like an adder, and it's got a lot of problems also with it. And so Xerxes here, certainly a spoiled drunk. I think that's probably very well said. Okay, so drunkenness was one of the things. Galatians chapter 5 and verse 21, you're going to hear again tonight when we cover that roster of sins there, the deeds of the flesh. Drunkenness falls into that same category. And Ephesians 5:18, do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation. Was that the passage you were thinking about, sister? When you said Ephesians earlier, Ephesians 5:18? Do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation. Okay. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Fawn.
It seems to me there's a level of pride here too, that he can't just go and talk to his wife and see what's wrong. Why didn't you come to me?
Okay, so why would pride be a problem? Fawn, you've got the lollipop.
Why would it be a problem? If he doesn't want to.
Well, just in general, it doesn't have to necessarily be as part of this context, but
I feel like maybe he didn't want to think that anything he said was wrong, or that he couldn't bring himself to say what is wrong. Let me go check on my wife and see.
wow.
Why wouldn't she come?
And you're not married, and you figured that out. That's pretty. Okay, Larry.
I'm help out. I'm the
Okay.
He's the king. Don't tell me nothing. And that's pretty much how some people in leadership.
Yes.
I mean, we talked about the kings in Second Chronicles.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Some are humble and some not so much.
And pride does seem to be a problem, like we saw today with Hezekiah. Yeah. The thing is that pride is all about me, and there's not a lot of room for God if it's all about me in my particular life. As you remember, what used to be on that thing: pride goes before a fall, and a haughty spirit before destruction. Yep. Who are some other Bible characters that had fallen victim to pride? Who? Moses? Joshua said he was the humblest man who ever lived, so I'm going to probably have to...
Can you be ensnared with pride like
Well, I think certainly so. Yeah, I think pride is a trap that people can fall into because sadly, yes, sadly Barnabas fell into the same sin as Peter did by withdrawing from the Gentiles there in Galatians chapter 2. Herod, if you read Acts chapter 12, verses 20 through 22, he was wearing this royal robe that must have been just incredible. And the people he was talking to there in the region of Tyre and Sidon, they were saying, "Oh, the voice of a God and not of a man." And he accepted that. And so if you remember that part of Acts, it says that an angel touched him and he was eaten with worms. There's a real neat section if you're interested. I can share with you a book from the Apostolic Fathers where it talks about what happened to Herod through the course of his disease. Yes, you're going to have to speak way up because my lollipop people are... Okay. Nope, they're on their way.
How about Saul?
King Saul.
He was so used to God being with him, he was shocked when he wasn't with him anymore.
Oh, yeah.
They got used to it.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, because, and kind of like Larry said, everybody sort of kowtows down because he's king. Yeah, it's good to be king. Something that's interesting, and we don't have it here, you have it more so in the book of Daniel. Do you remember in Daniel chapter 6, Daniel, and he's at almost the top of the food chain. There was the king, Darius, and then there was Daniel and two others that were called his counselors, and then there were 120 satraps. Those guys were like governors of regions, small and great. And they learned that Darius was going to appoint Daniel to be head over all of them except for himself. And Darius was just going to kind of like take the time off, and Daniel was going to run things because Darius saw how God had truly blessed him with wisdom and all that sort of stuff. And so those other two and the 120 satraps, they said, what we need to do, because we can't find anything, any charge to bring against him because of his business dealings, because he's so honest. The only thing we can do is find something regarding his faith in his God. Remember what they came up with? Their plan was, they went to Darius and they said, "O King Darius, live forever. Since you are such a great king, we have decided that we should make a law that no one can offer any petition to any man or God other than you for the next 30 days. And we will write it in the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be broken." And see, that it mentioned that a little bit here in this particular section also, that it should be written in the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be broken. And so Darius, when Daniel went up to his bedroom and it faced Jerusalem, and he prayed 3 times a day up there, well, they caught him up there praying. They said, this is what's happened. They brought Daniel before Darius. Darius, for the whole day, he tried to find some loophole there. There was no loophole. So that's why he had to throw Daniel into the lion's den, because the law of the Medes and the Persians couldn't be broken. That's the difference between the Babylonian Empire and the Medo-Persian Empire. In the Babylonian Empire, guess what the law was? Whatever Nebuchadnezzar said it was. As far as the king ruled. There was no law greater than the king. However, the Medes and the Persians, laws limited the power of the king. It was kind of like the, what was it called? You guys remember, this is English history, and it was called what is it? The Magna Carta. Yes, the great charter. And the king had to sign this, and that's what put Parliament into play, because now the king could not do things without having Parliament's approval and things of that nature. So we have 2 things, are Xerxes' problems that you have mentioned: pride and drunkenness. Do you see any others in there? I'm not saying there are, but do you see any others that are in there? He was bossy. Well, he is king, you know. They do pay him to be bossy. He certainly, you could probably say he was extravagant. I mean, a party lasting 180 days. Wow, that's some party. Okay, question number 2 then. What about Vashti? Was she right or wrong to refuse? And if you give me an answer, I want you to also share with me your thinking on why she was either right or wrong. So raise your hand. Was Vashti right or was Vashti wrong to come to the king? You got to raise your hand so that our lollipop man can give it to you.
In his drunken state, I think Vashti was afraid of what he might say or do in front of everyone, so, as to embarrass her.
So you're saying that she was right to do it because
Yes.
he may have said or done something
Right.
that would be very embarrassing to her.
This may have happened before, maybe not
Ooh.
on a large scale, but she might have known probably from another incident what he's capable of doing.
These spoiled drunks, what are you going to do? Okay, so we have one vote for, yes, of course she was right, because he could have said or done something that would have violated something for her. What else?
I don't think we can decide if she was right or wrong because we don't know the reason that she didn't.
Oh, sure, just pull the rug right out from under the teacher and say, move on. Well, I'm not going to move on because I'm the teacher. And by the law of me. Okay, that's true. That we don't have it, so this truly is just guesswork. I mean, but understand, she knew Xerxes. I mean, this guy did have a power and authority. He was over this far-flung empire and this whole thing. She knew that choosing not to go would not have been without consequence. And so that's one of the things why I want to see what she obviously believed is that her doing this was greater than the consequence that would follow. And she didn't even know what the consequence was. So what other thoughts or questions or thoughts that you have regarding Vashti's refusal? Was she right or was she wrong? What? Yes, please say it again.
I said, eventually she knew that he was going to have to lay down and go to sleep so she could take care of business, Anyway.
Does the name Lorena Bobbitt come to mind? Wow. Is it possible that she believed that she is being treated as property, as chattel? The king was treating her as property, and she didn't like the thought that she was treated as property. Is that a possibility? Norma? You don't have to answer that, just your thing.
My thought is that she also had parties that she had for the women of this area. So she was maybe challenging, maybe she was asserting her authority as queen because she was very beautiful in the land and had a lot of esteem from the women. Maybe it was a silent coup.
A silent coup. Ooh. I'm learning so many cool phrases. Spoiled drunks and silent coups. Yeah. Well, who knows? I mean, like Sherry said, we don't know exactly. Any other thoughts as to why you think Vashti refused, or you think she was right or wrong in her refusal? Okay, here's the thing we're going to do. And since the camera only stays on me, you'll be safe. How many of you believe that Vashti made the right decision? Raise your hands. How many of you, I want you to know, for those of you watching at home, several men raised their hands. They're going nameless, but I think one of them just because he wants to get in somebody's good graces after saying what he said earlier. But, okay, so how many of you think that opposite of that she was wrong? Or wow, many of you think she was right. Okay, so what did King Xerxes do when this happened? He followed some steps. What are some things that King Xerxes do? First thing he did was He what? Well, he did become angry. That's true. Yep. Yeah. Yep. That's true. Anger can make you do some irrational things, and of course, he'd had a few things. Okay. And Tiggy.
He consulted the wise men and the experts,
Okay. So he consulted.
and drunks.
That doesn't say that. They may have been joining him in the fruit of the grape, but he did consult his wise men.
I just want to say, in this situation, we've already stated that he's the king. And got this big party, 180 days with no people. He's prideful. And she probably knows he's prideful.
She's his wife.
So the question earlier was she right in her stance to not come? She thought she was right in her stance, but of course it leads to some other things that is precipitous that he does other things. And then this is a play on other people's opinion about what he's done. So I was going to bring up the point. You and me and Chris and Tina at the house, and you say, Chris, give me something to drink. She says, get it yourself.
This is a for instance, people. He's not talking about something that just happened this past weekend.
When me and Tina go to the car and on the way home, we're going to say, did you see what happened? I mean, that's the real one.
Yeah. And didn't I tried to not really say too much about it at the time, but did you notice how the wise men who understood the times and the things of that nature, they said, other women are going to find out about this. People are going to find out that this is done, and then they are going to treat their husbands the way that Vashti treated Ahasuerus. How many more times in the Bible do we ever read about Vashti after this? None. Don't know what happened to Queen Vashti. So we don't.
He also made a bigger deal out of it than he should have made out of it, because he's drunk and he's filled with pride, and he had her decline, and he goes and consult people like it's World War II or something like that, when all he had to do is go and talk to her.
Oh, come groveling to her because she's not going to show up for the party. What difference does it make? Why? He's king. I wish everybody was able to hear this whole class and not just me. You guys are great. Okay, Guy, you had your hand raised for, wait a minute, wait for the lollipop to show up. Go up. Richard, jump. Guy, Crabtree. Right there. This guy in the pink shirt.
Oh, wait. I'm not hearing good.
Okay. Okay, Guy, it's on you.
I may pay for this when I get home.
You're between your daughter and your wife. You're showing courage just by sitting there.
Other than him being,
Yeah.
other than him being drunk, granted, if you look at it from a man's perspective, his wife is beautiful. He's proud of her. He wants to show her off. Look what I have. I can see that with my wife. If I'm having a party, I want to show everybody my wife.
Okay, so it really, it would have been a good thing. He was, yeah, and he was showing all the other things. He was very proud and pleased, but last but not least, there's my gorgeous wife, Vashti. In fact, go get Vashti and bring her in for everybody here. Where's the downside? Okay, so yes, he consulted his wise men. He listened to his, hold on to that. He listened to his wise men's counsel, and he accepted and followed their counsel. Melissa, what do you think?
Okay, let's think that, back in that day, and even in today, queens, or the wives of the king, start putting themselves on the same level as their husbands. And they think they're as important as what the husbands are. And that day is a little more savage. Let me tell you, so he probably had to hold on to his power with an iron fist, because there was people waiting in the wings to take over if he won't show his power. So she made a real bad mistake thinking she was as important. He had to prove that he was still the tough guy. I don't know.
Okay. You become the hero for every man in this room. That's exactly right. Okay. What do you think about the counsel, about the things that his counselors said, their rationale? Do you think that they were right in what they were saying in their counsel to the king, or do you think they were wrong in that counsel? Christine, this is going to be fun. My wife. For those of you who don't know.
It doesn't make it right or wrong, but that's just the way it was at that time. And this may have been one of the first times that she did this, and he was shocked, and so were the others. Like I said, it doesn't make it right, but that's just the way those guys were.
It is what it is.
What the law was, it may have been off with their head.
That'd be bad news. Okay. Oh, look, there's 1 minute left. Okay, so next week we're going to start in chapter 2. That's when we're going to have the Miss Persia contest. And I think kind of like in our day today, how they've gotten rid of the bathing beauty or the bathing suit part of the show. They didn't have that back in then either. But in just at the bottom do I have anything on your sheet where it talks about similarities between the Persian and Babylonian Empire? Do I have that there? Well, then let me just say it. The thing that is different in that day versus this day, the days of the Medes and the Persians versus the Babylonians, as I mentioned, in the Babylonian era, the king was in charge. He was the law of the land. No law was made. If the king made a law, he could violate his own law. He could say that that doesn't apply to me, or one of those things. So we're seeing that it kind of a change in authority. We've gone from kings to now the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. And so things are a little bit different. So next week, we're going to be introduced to Hadassah, and we're going to hear about Mordecai also. Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for this time we can spend in the first chapter of Esther. And Father, then as now, we see that there are times when there seems to be difficulties between husbands and wives. And fathers, we recognize that in this case, in the case of Ahasuerus, where his counselors tell him one thing, and they say there's a reason why he needs to do that, and because if he doesn't, all the women are going to start treating people the way that his wife treated him. Father, we recognize people are going to talk, people are going to give counsel. Help us, Father, however, be a people who always come to your word for our counsel, because, Father, those counselors may not have been right in what they said, and certainly, Father, we see there were certain other problems in the court of the king, as well as just this one problem. Thank you, Father, for helping us have a glimpse of an ancient time that still has some current issues that we deal with today. Father, help us learn from your word, because we recognize it is profitable for teaching us, for reproving and correcting us, and for training us, Father, in righteousness. Help us, therefore, Father, be good students of your book. For we offer this prayer in our lives to you, in Jesus' name.